1967 that the future of the world in materials is plastic. And here we are in 2012, finding out that this material that is so great and we can do so many things with doesn't go away. It stays around. And as we've been using it in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and 2000, we're finding more and more and more in our communities, in our environment, on land and in the ocean, and it's not going away. And this is build-up is what is really inspired, and it's the reason for the issue of the plastic in the ocean in big areas where it's aggregating. A couple facts here for you. The US alone uses 117 million barrels of oil a year just to make plastic bottles for drinks, juices, cokes, waters. That's about 72 billion bottles a year, and only about 25% of those bottles in the US actually get recycled. Big gap. We use, out of all the plastic we make for different products, about 50% of that is used for disposable products. So we're using a permanent material that will last decades or hundreds of years for a fork or a knife or a coffee stirrer or something that we use for 30 seconds or 2 minutes and throw it away. And then we have a problem with basura. And roughly around the world, 90% of all plastic that we make actually never gets recycled. Even though there's a little triangle on the bottom of the product and it says, please recycle me, it doesn't get recycled. And actually, this is a big opportunity because plastics come from oil predominantly until we get into bioplastic. So this is really solidified fuel or a resource or something we can turn back into another plastic. So the reason we're using the ocean as one of the rationale for this, I think one of the reasons we're in a position today where our ocean is damaged is because in 1960, Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh, which Fabien Cousteau mentioned last night, set a world record. They went in the Mariana Trench in this submersible. They went down to the bottom of the ocean, 11,000 meters, looked out of a window, came up to the top, said, wow, we set the world record. And everyone said, oh, wow, it's been done. We conquered the ocean, finished. And then Kennedy and the space race with the Soviet Union started, and Kennedy said, we're going to the moon. And after that point, we've always looked up. Always look at the moon, always look at Mars. Now we're trying to go to Mars, and we're spending so much money up there, and we completely forgot, in a relative sense, the 75% of our planet, which is the ocean. And that's why since this time until now, we sort of have left this place to be overfished, to be polluted, to be forgotten, except for the few industries that use it. And this is where there's a big opportunity now, and it's starting to happen. People are realizing we need to protect our ocean a bit more. This image is interesting. It's the UN estimates that roughly 11 billion pounds of plastic goes into the ocean every year. That mostly comes from rivers and coastlines and our habits. Now this child, I think if we can keep this one light off, it's better. This child is actually, this is a Jakarta river, very famous for its plastic. He is picking up only one thing, which is straws. And that's because someone in his village or somewhere in that community said that those straws have a value and they're worth something. So he goes out in there in this mess and he picks out the money. And I was at a conference once and I had a poster of this, and only one person out of all these people came up to me and said, that picture is about gold flowing down the river. I said, that's exactly right. That's what we need people to think about. that this trash is worth money. Trash is cash. Should be treated as a resource, not as a garbage. But this is the challenge that we're facing in the world today. But the opportunities are there, and they're starting to come. So the UN estimates that roughly 80% of all the garbage in the water comes from land. It's not from big boats that go out and dump it. It's from bins that are overflowing, and then they don't get picked up, and the dogs come or the rains come and they go into the river. They're from bad landfills, and they flood, illegal landfills, all kind of different things. People who don't have any waste management. The big problem is that we're using plastic at a greater rate, but the world's and the country's waste management systems and recycling systems are not nearly keeping pace with the waste that we are generating in our society, especially when we're using consuming one-time use products for our quick convenience. The waste management and recycling systems simply aren't keeping pace with that. And the ocean, unfortunately, is at the end of the pipeline of this. Everything that goes downstream ends up in the water. We'll talk about that in a bit. So one of the projects that we did about 3 years ago is that we went on an expedition with 2 boats, one with Scripps Oceanography, the other was a boat called the Kaisei. And we went to this area in the North Pacific called the North Pacific Gyre. There are 5 gyres in every big ocean of the world. And a gyre is a big circulatory system, almost like a hurricane, but it's in the water. And it's just the area where the currents move around in that part of the water. And anything that floats will get stuck there unless it gets pushed by the wind to the ocean, to the shore, or maybe it sinks. So in the past, it used to be wood and seaweed and different organic material. But now that plastic is here and it floats and it doesn't biodegrade, it's getting stuck in these zones. And it can come from all parts of land, not just one place. It's everywhere. And this is international waters. And so this causes a different issue because there's no one country that owns this part of the ocean. And you can't call someone up and say, hey, Japan, it's time for you to do a cleanup. Hey, US, you do a cleanup, because it's outside of everyone's zones, economic zones of 200-mile limit. So we have this issue. It's like the tragedy of the commons, where we all use and need the water. We all contribute to it, but there's no one to call on really to fix it. One of the things we did is we took this big net, and we were the first group to sample for fish down to 700 meters deep. And we found many different fish, and when we get those little fish out of the water, we check those fish to see what was in them. We also did water sampling, specifically just to get water samples. Each one of these 24 canisters will go 500 meters down, and they're 10 liters each, about 2.5 gallons. And they trigger at different depths when the machine is coming up from 500 meters. And by accident, in the entire Pacific Ocean, we found a piece of plastic in one of these containers at 200 meters deep and one at 160 meters deep. Imagine that, a piece of plastic in this little thing the size of in the ocean. So that means that there's some depth to this problem. It's not just a floating problem like people might think with an island. This material, the plastic, is at some point changing its buoyancy, or there's biofouling some material on it and causing it to sink. And so that was a bit of a shock to us. This is a net that we sample with. It's for testing for plankton, but it also is very good at picking up very small pieces of plastic, called a mantid net. And we sampled over 3,000 miles of water with this, and we got between the 2 boats, and we got plastic in every single sample in the middle of the ocean, 1,000 miles from land. So it wasn't as if we were going into the African, forest looking for some endangered species and maybe you find a footprint. we were finding the footprint of us every place we went. Now this fish is called a hatchet fish, and this is one of the fish we caught in that big net. These fish only live at about 300 to 400 meters deep in a band. And one of these fish had this guy had a piece of plastic in it, which suggests that either he ate a fish that maybe had digested that plastic, or the plastic was raining down and he grabbed it on the way down, which again shows that there's really three-dimensionality and depth to this problem out in the Pacific. Now this is probably a beer crate or some kind of drink crate. It's not suspended in the air. This is crystal blue water in the middle of the ocean. If you look closely, you probably can't see it, but these little white spots here are actually little pieces of plastic. And what happens is when these big pieces of plastic sit in the sun for a long time, they start to break down. A lot like furniture would be on your roof if it's in the sun for a long time. And this is some of the material that we grabbed from the side of our boat as we were out in the middle of the Pacific. But what happens as it breaks down from the wind and the waves and the sun exposure is it gets smaller and smaller. And it gets a bit more and more and more like fish food. Now this is an interesting sample with jellyfish, but inside what you'll see is there's almost no red colors, no bright colors. They're all white, blue, or gray. And one of the reasons for that is because anything that's red is more likely to look like a fish egg or a shrimp or some little piece of food for an animal. So you could think about someone who's using red bottle caps or red material for their products. If that gets in the ocean, it's a little bit more likely to get eaten by an animal. This little fish is called a lanternfish. They live near the top of the water. They get eaten by much bigger fish, dorado, wahoo, things that go into our food chain. This fish is only about 5 centimeters in size. And one other group who was doing studies actually found 83 pieces of plastic in one of these little fish. So what's happening is, unfortunately, as things look for food, they're mistaking this colorful and floating material or sinking material for food. Now the problem with this in the ocean, which a lot of people don't know about, is that plastics as a petroleum product act like a magnet for toxins. So this plastic by itself, when it's fresh and new, goes into the ocean, probably won't toxify anything. But when it's in the water, when the rains come from land from burning plastic, and the rains come and deposit the pollutants or pesticides from the river, agricultural waste, any of these heavy metals and things grab on the plastic like a magnet. So when the fish eat that plastic, these little pieces probably won't kill a fish, but those fatty tissue of that fish can suck the toxins off of the plastic into the fish's stomach. And that is where the toxicity goes. We're not going to probably bite into a fish and get a mouthful of plastic, hopefully, but we may be getting these toxins into our bodies through this system. So plastic then is becoming a carrier to this. So some of you might have seen these photos before. This is from Chris Jordan on Midway Island. This is a baby albatross. And unfortunately, you can see here all the bright colors. What happens, the albatross parents fly around the ocean looking for food for hundreds of miles, and anything they see on the water to them is food, because that's what it used to be. They come home, they regurgitate the food into the baby birds, and that food is filling the stomach of the baby. Now, unfortunately, that food is plastic, and so the baby thinks he's full, but there's no nutrition because it's actually not food, and the baby starves. Here's a cigarette lighter, golf balls, toothbrushes. What they sadly have found, this is an art piece that someone did. All of this is plastic material from one bird. And the sad thing is that this just gets recycled, but it's the wrong recycling. This will end up with the bird who's dead on a beach, on a flat beach. The rains come, the waves come. It's going to go right back in the water for the next 80 years, 100 years, and probably happen how many times more? We don't know. We're only just starting to figure all of this out. But it's not just the birds and the fish, it's all kind of animals. There's some studies that have shown that 700 species of marine animals and birds are now known to be impacted in some way from plastic. And that's not to mention also the fact that land animals have this issue. Cows, giraffes, goats, all kind of things on land. So it's not just ocean animals. This whale washed up on a beach in California near Point Reyes in the north about 3 years ago, sperm whale. They opened it up, had 400 kilos of plastic and nets in his stomach. And now when they find whales, they have started cutting them open. They used to just bury them because they smelled so bad on the beach. Now they've started to open them and figure out what was wrong. Almost all of the whales they find these days have plastic in them because they've mistaken them for food, jellyfish, squid, something like that when they're hunting. Again, where does it come from? It comes from land and our use predominantly. It's not from big ships that go out and dump it. So how can we, sitting all here and going inland, start to make a difference in stuff that goes into the ocean? This is a photo, a friend of mine, when we were diving in Bali in a national park. I mean, this is not good for tourism. This is not good for much of anything. There were dolphins feeding about 200 meters away from this. So I'm going to show you a video here. To me, this is actually was one of the saddest ones I've seen in a long time. This is 2,000 meters deep off of the coast of Italy, 12 kilometers, with a submersible and high resolution images. It's extremely high pressure here and extremely low temperature. So the chances of any little microbes or biodegradation happening here are very, very slim. And this is just to show us what is on the bottom of our ocean. Our issues that we've talked about with beaches and floating things are just at the surface. And in fact, roughly 70% of all the trash that goes into the ocean sinks and doesn't even stay at the top. Now, something I just want to mention that we're working on that we with some scientists at University of Hawaii and Scripps Oceanography. In December, we put 11 tracker buoys with satellites this is Hawaii, and this is Midway Island. And the tsunami debris flow, when you looked at the models from Japan, how the tsunami debris was moving across the Pacific, this was on the southeastern end of the debris flow, which went all the way up like this. And no one else had put any tracking mechanisms to see where the debris is going. And so we had a sailor go out here and lay these buoys. And if you look on our website, oceanrecov.org, you can see these buoys every day changing. So this is what they've done since December till now in September. This is more than 1,000 kilometers. And it's obviously not going to tell us everything about the debris flow, but what's interesting is this is going to go into the gyre if it doesn't end up on land, and it will give us some ability to further discuss and raise awareness about the plastic and how that's getting into the middle of the ocean. So two of the projects that we're working on to try to address this ocean issue with plastic debris come back to land. And we're trying to do some projects that we can really create global change in prevention of plastic pollution. So both of these we announced at the Clinton Global Initiative. The Plastic Disclosure Project is similar to carbon disclosure, if you know what that is, where a company might disclose and report how much carbon they use every year in their operation. What we want companies or institutions like a university, an airport, a stadium, a hospital, and municipality to think about is what is your plastic use or your trash that's created in your organization every week, every month, and how can we aggregate that plastic in a better way to get opportunities for better use, recycling, and making sure that that doesn't get out of the system into the environment. So there's 5 main ways that a company or a group can make improvements in their plastic footprint or their plastic use. We don't ever say don't use plastic because it will be impossible to get rid of it overnight. But we're saying let's just use it much smarter so it doesn't get out there or into the river, into the park. Increasing recycled content in your material. Increasing the recycling programs. That doesn't just mean putting some bins outside your door. It means working with your consumer base, an extended producer responsibility. If you're going to sell them something, even across countries, what happens with that product when it's done? Is there a way to bring that back? Is there a way to have a third party collect that? Is there a way to get it into your stores again, drive business back into your store, but build that recycling program somehow with your community of users? Less waste. Obviously, in the supply chain, there's a lot of waste, a lot of shrink wrapping, things that don't need to get used. New design for products and also new material, and that could be bioplastics, plant-based plastics. Any of those things are huge opportunities for job creation, innovation, new products, and solving a big problem. One of the companies that we are working, that we support each other, but they have a great product, just got launched in Safeway stores, the second biggest chain in the US for grocery stores, is called Replenish. And they make plastic bottles, but they save 90% of the plastic with the way they do it, and they save water. So they give you a big bottle like this. It's almost like buying a Gillette razor. You buy the razor, and you have to keep buying the blades. What they're doing is giving you the big squirt bottle that's reusable many, 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 many times, and they're just selling these little discs at the bottom with concentrated material for the cleaning or the washing. So instead of shipping water around the world, instead of putting water on all the shelf space of every grocery store, they're just selling this one squirt bottle, and then you're buying the refills. And that saves a huge amount of material. So they're still using plastic, but this new design, which to me is like the Apple iPhone of a squirt bottle, is making a huge difference. And they will probably transform the way we use things. We can use it in concentrate form and save the material that we're shipping things around in. Another project we're working on, and we also hope to be working with Vida Azul here in Dominican Republic on this, is called Global Alert. And basically, if you think of the world's river systems like blood vessels, and those blood vessels go to the heart, and the heart is the ocean. You can think of the plastic in the blood vessels as cholesterol. In a way, that's kind of what it is. But these are the highways, these are the through points of where the plastic is coming. And if we can use a system to stop the bleeding into the ocean, then we can cause a big change. And not only could it cause a big change, but it can also create recycling and all these new things if you're getting raw material coming down the river. So think of this. This is a map of China. I happen to live in Hong Kong. And when you're looking at the coastline, this project we're working on, which links all the world's rivers to the ocean, kind of does a different thing with the coastline. So imagine you're in a school and the teacher asks the student, say, hey, Jose, go up there and show me what the coastline is of China. Put your pencil on the map and draw it all the way up to Beijing from Hong Kong. So Jose goes up and he draws that right up the coastline to Beijing. Teacher says, wow, that's great. You know, that is exactly what most people think it is. But what you really need to think about with a coastline is to go from Hong Kong up to Shanghai, turn left, go all the way up the Yangtze River to Tibet, do a U-turn, come all the way back down, and then go left and then go to Beijing. That's really the coastline. But we don't think of it that way. So all of these people are part of the coastline, even though they don't think they are part of the ocean. And they might never go to the ocean, but they still are near the water, and they're still near the highway. When you add the 20 biggest rivers in the world together with the right bank and the left bank, you add those miles or kilometers, it's 86,000 more miles to the coastline of what we thought of as coastline. That's 3 times around the world. And that doesn't include all of these rivers here. So there's trillions of miles probably of this coastline that we can all now be interconnected. And that's interesting because when you go to a water conference, usually you talk about water, fresh water, and drinking water and what the rivers are doing and droughts and all of that. They never talk about the ocean. If you go to ocean conference, they will never talk about drinking water. And these two water worlds often don't meet very much. And so this is an interesting way to bring both of these water worlds together, unfortunately, with trash as a common denominator. So what we're trying to build is a map, global map, that basically allows people with a smartphone or a normal camera and a computer to report trash hotspots on their river systems or coastlines. And when you do that and you can get data points in these rivers, then all kinds of other groups who have the capacity to go out and do something to help this can make a difference. Whether it's a municipality, a university, an NGO, a business, a Rotary Club, they can say, oh my gosh, look at all these hot spots along my part of the river. Why is that there? Why is it on my coast? We have to go out, put a boom up, put some nets up, catch that before it goes downstream, and then later figure out where it's coming from. So that's something we're working on, and here's something in your local beach here that we did a cleanup yesterday with this whole film festival. And this is what the beach looked like before we went out. Now, I don't know this brand, but I found these bottles here, 911, which is energy drink. For those of you who've been to the US, you know that 911 means emergency. So that is a perfect example of emergency. This is an emergency. So we need to ramp up the volume on that one. But great day yesterday, 150 kids, and they did a great job. I mean, these were high school kids, and this is the beach afterwards. It's a lot better. There's a lot of foam there. The foam's very hard to get. Tons of styrofoam. That is bad stuff. But at least it happened. But the problem is that stuff's coming out the river, up, down the coast, up the coast, and it's the next 3 days, it's going to be back again. And so we need to start thinking about what we're doing with this stuff in our daily lives. I hope you all know that there's a huge beach cleanup for the Ocean Conservancy and Vida Azul and World Ocean Cleanup on the 15th of September. This is their campaign, beautiful campaign with the trash and the volleyball player. So hopefully you can all have everyone participate. Now, look into the future, and the future is really today, because this now is starting to become available. Of course, there's recycling. That can be a great way to take plastic and use it, and that's what we need to do here in the Dominican Republic and everywhere else. Put a value on that. As soon as there's a value, people will collect it. So we need to bring better capabilities here to blend that material, recycle it, reuse it, or export it. It's okay, but we have to get the economies of scale and get people thinking that this stuff is a resource, not a trash, not waste. So basura equals dinero. Okay? This is the plastic to fuel machines today that are just coming into the market in some countries. It took them a long time to figure out how to put all kinds of plastic together in one batch and turn it into fuel. They're not burning it, they're liquefying it and turning it to diesel. And it's cleaner diesel in sulfur content than was what's sold in most countries. So you're benefiting on the air pollution, and you're making a product that is highly sellable, especially in a place like here where it's $5 a gallon for diesel. So, quick metrics here, roughly, on a conservative side, 1 ton of plastic, 40% of that becomes liquid fuel that's sellable. Now that's conservative. Some machines do 70%, 60%. Let's say it's 40% here. So one of my bags yesterday that I was picking up with the kids on the beach was 15 pounds of plastic. That's 1 gallon of diesel here in Dominican is 195 pesos. That means my bag was worth 140 pesos. How many bags did we have yesterday, Oscar?
1,628.
And how many bags was that? 96 or something. We had almost 100 bags. 1,600 pounds these school children picked up yesterday in less than 90 minutes. So you guys can do the math. Now, obviously, this machine is not in Dominican Republic yet. It's not in most countries yet. But this is where we need to be going. Okay? So the challenge, plant the seed, all those good things. You guys have the resources here. The resources, sadly, is garbage. But all of the world has garbage. Everyone has the same problem. And so this is some of the stuff we're working on, using the ocean as the rationale to solve this. One of the things that we sort of talk about with school kids, you all hear about reduce, reuse, recycle. We added 2 R's to that. Refuse it first. If you don't need these things, the straw, you can drink out of a cup without a straw probably. Stir, some of these things, refuse it, and then we don't have the problem. But if you have to use these things, but you don't recycle, then you get refuse. And refuse is basura, is garbage, and we have a problem. So what can you do? Thinking about the Plastic Disclosure Project, if you think of your carbon footprint, you might think of your water footprint. Now we want people to start thinking of your plastic footprint, and that can be done pretty easily because plastic's easy to see, touch, and it's in your house. You and your family could think, how much should we use in a week? How much should we throw out? Once you just start thinking that way, it's very interesting how fast things can change and how your lifestyle can change, and that can make a big difference. So I think with that, I'll finish up here.